With more, we are now joined by Richard Fadden. Mr. Fadden is a former National Security Advisor, a former Deputy Minister for National Defense, and from 2009 to 2013 was Director of CSIS. Mr. Fadden, thank you for joining us again.
My pleasure.
Now, the U.S. has recovered debris from the first balloon. I want to begin with that. What exactly will they be looking for? Evidence of spying, technology? What are they keeping their eyes out for?
Well, I think they've concluded that there was some spying involved, so that will simply be confirmation. I think one of the most important things they will be looking for is the technology. How good is the technology? Is it similar to that of the United States? Are they more advanced, less advanced? And one of the things about intelligence is that you take a particular piece like that related to the balloon, and you link it up with other bits of intelligence that you may have about Chinese intelligence capabilities. And that can give you a much better picture of what they're capable of. And if you have a better picture of what they're capable of, you're in a much better position to develop countermeasures. Also, if you're lucky, you can use all of the technology and all of the material to try and extrapolate how the balloon got here, but more importantly, why it's here. I'm not sure that they'll be able to do that at all, but they will be looking at it from every conceivable angle. But the most important is the technology, which enables us to develop better countermeasures over time.
Now, China still denies it is a spy balloon. In fact, they said that the U.S. have had their balloons infringe on Chinese airspace in the past as well. What do you make of the response that we're hearing from Beijing?
Well, I have some difficulty accepting at face value what they're saying, because the Chinese party state has the practice of never admitting any fault, but always of casting responsibility on other states. The United States, all the major powers have intelligence gathering capabilities. The U.S. has, China has. I think what we're arguing about here is whether or not the balloon intelligence gathering program is a significant one over time. I really don't know if the United States has one. I would be somewhat surprised if they do, because you can gather virtually everything from satellites.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Prime Minister, as you know, says that there seems to be a pattern emerging for unauthorized intrusions into North American airspace. Do you see a pattern?
Well, I think he's right when he says we see a pattern. There's been 4 of these things over 10 days or so. But the really important question is, what's behind the pattern? And I don't think we're going to be able to articulate clearly what that is until we have more information about the three objects that have been downed, other than the large balloon. So, is there a pattern? Yeah, sure. It's 4 over 10 days suggests that there's something similar here. But if it turns out that they're all from China, that's one thing. That's a really worrisome pattern, but we're in no position right now to say that. If, on the other hand, it's 1 or 2 China, a couple of commercial, and something from another country, that's an entirely different thing again. It may appear as if everybody's trying to not answer the question, but we really do need more information before we can agree with the Prime Minister on what kind of pattern he's seeing.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talk about information, and it seems as this story goes on, these incidents go on, the U.S., their officials have been more comfortable sharing information than have Canadians. Why is that?
Well, I think part of it is there's a tradition of the Americans being a little bit more open on national security than we are. They're also more open in the United Kingdom and Australia. We have a practice of being quite reticent about national security issues. In this particular case, the United States has direct access to the Chinese balloon, so this does put them in a somewhat better position to comment on that aspect. But I think, broadly speaking, Canadian ministers have been very reluctant to say a great deal because we don't know a great deal. Having said that, I repeat what I've just said. Overall, we tend to be quite reticent in Canada in talking about national security issues. And we often get some information from the United States, which just as easily could have been provided by Canadian officials.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I also wonder, given your background in both security and defense, what do these incidents tell you about Canada's state of readiness? Because that has been questioned in the past few days.
That's a complex question, I think, because in terms of space and aerial awareness, surveillance, that's a responsibility of NORAD, that's set up by treaty between Canada and the United States, and that organization is responsible for knowing what's coming into North American airspace. My sense is they're doing a pretty decent job of it, although increasingly people are now beginning to suggest that some of these balloons or other kinds of objects have been over our airspace in the past, but we haven't really captured them. But I think you cannot talk about this topic without mentioning the fact that both the government of the United States in particular, but the Canadian government as well, have acknowledged over time that we need to modernize NORAD. The circumstances have changed quite a bit since NORAD was created. We now have hypersonic weapons. We worry about North Korea when we didn't have to do that, and sometimes in the past. We really don't know what the Russians are up to. So I think, broadly speaking, we're not doing too badly, but anybody who thinks that we're entirely up to date to deal with all of the threats that might conceivably be directed at North America, I think is being a bit optimistic.
Do you hope that this incident, these incidences, create more conversation?
I very much hope so. I think one of the characteristics of national security in Canada is we don't talk about things very much unless there is a crisis of one sort or the other. I'm not sure I would call this a crisis, but it's certainly an event that is capturing a great deal of public attention, and I do hope we can talk about it. One of the characteristics, I think, of the national security dialogue, if I can put it that way, in Canada, is Canadians, generally speaking, don't feel terribly threatened. And if you don't feel threatened, it doesn't encourage government to do a great deal in the field. But things like this, the fact that we're having this conversation, that you're going to broadcast it, I think is important because it draws to the attention of Canadians and of our political leaders that there are threats against Canada that are real. And if we're going to take our sovereignty seriously, we have to spend time, money, and effort in developing the capabilities to deal with them.
Richard Fadden, appreciate the time once again. Thank you for this.
My pleasure.